Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys swinging by the channel to watch today's video, because we're going to be talking about fishing bridge pilings today. Bridge piers, bridge pilings, they are some of the greatest bass fishing cover that you'll ever fish, and I have not been to any lake across the country where you can't catch fish on bridge piers. So I want to give you guys a detailed, like a really detailed little seminar on how to approach bridge piers, best lures for them, best conditions for them, and I think it's going to add up to a lot of good fishing for you guys, because a bridge pier is sort of like a riprap. Bridge piers and riprap sometimes get a lot of fishing pressure, but the reason is because a ton of bass use them. So you can't overlook something that's got a lot of bass living on it. And a lot of times, like anything else, it's just figuring out the best technique, and I'm going to share some of that stuff with you guys today. Also, guys, before we get started, I just want to remind you about my boat here, my Vexus 1980 aluminum bass boat. This is going to be for sale through Branson West Marine, probably in June. So anybody interested in purchasing my boat here from Branson West Marine, just give them a call. I'll put the link in the description. Just tell them you saw my video and you're curious about Randy's boat here. And guys, whoever buys this boat, I'm going to take you guys out personally on Table Rock Lake, and we'll let you run it around, and I'll go over through the whole boat with you and get y'all lined out on it. I think you guys are going to love it, man. I just absolutely love that boat, man. It's so responsive, and it fishes so good, and it's great in rough water. It's got a ton of storage. I think you guys will really like it. Okay, let's talk about bridge piers, man. Bridge piers are one of those deals that you've got to be aware of the best technique and how to approach them in order to catch fish, simply because they do get a lot of fishing pressure. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about overall why the fish use them, and sort of like how some bridge piers are better than others, because they're not all created equal. Most of the bass that I have found that live around the bridge piers, they do so because they feed on a lot of shad that hang out around those piers, because the bridge piers will get algae and moss on them. And if you've ever spent much time around a bridge pier, a lot of the times you can see shad feeding on the algae and the plankton off the side of those piers. So a lot of fish will obviously, target them for that reason. But another reason is the shade of a bridge. When you have shade overhead, there's something about having shade overhead that draws in shad deeper, not necessarily to feed on the algae and plankton on the bridge piers, but they like to live underneath the bridge, away from the bridge piers, like in the middle. Like, if you looked at a bridge and the bridge has got 5 bridge piers on it, a lot of those shad will live in the shade underneath the bridge, not necessarily next to the bridge piling. So when you're talking about fishing bridge piers, you're actually talking about fishing the entire length of the bridge, the piers, and even in between the piers, which can be a considerable distance that we'll get into. So that's another thing we'll talk about. But one of the things that I have found about bridge pier fishing is, like, so much of it centers around water clarity. Having the right water clarity around a bridge pier is the key to its productivity, because in my personal experiences, I have found that you need to have a window of like 3 to 10 foot of visibility in order to catch a lot of bass on a bridge pier. Maybe not quite 10, maybe closer to like 6 foot of visibility. 3 to 6 is perfect. If you get like super clear, like over 10 foot of visibility, you can catch some fish on them, but it doesn't seem like it's quite as good. And if you have less than 3 foot of visibility, it doesn't seem like a lot of bass use bridge piers, except for the piers that are shallow, like against the bank. But the piers that I'm talking about specifically in this video are the deeper piers where those bass will suspend around. So if you've got a dirty water lake that has 12 inches of visibility, and you've got one of those shallow piers that are up in like 3 or 4 foot of water, yeah, you can catch some fish on them. But for the most of the part, you're going to need to have 3 to 6 foot of visibility. That just seems like that water clarity window that pulls in a lot of bait fish and the bass, in general, and gives them that comfort range of being able to suspend in that. Another thing that's going to help out your bridge pier fishing a lot is if you have spotted bass in the lake. If you have a mix of largemouth and spotted bass love bridge piers. In fact, there's probably, if you have a lake that has anywhere but close to an equal, dispersion of largemouth and spotted bass, most of the bass you catch on them are going to be spots. The spots just love bridge piers. So any lake that has a diversity of species, largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass, they're going to be better bridge pier fishing lakes. Not to say that you can't catch them strictly on largemouth, but that's sort of been my experience with it. Now, another thing is time of the year. Fish will live on bridge piers all year long, but for me, the best time to fish a bridge pier is in the summer and the fall time of the year. You can catch them in the winter, you can catch them even in the spring sometime of the year, but the larger numbers, those bigger schools of fish, use those bridge piers when the water's warmer. And we're talking big schools. Guys, I have caught 50 and 60 bass on bridge piers many times, many times, and probably could have caught more if I'd had a different lure selection. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for those times when those fish are really schooled up around those piers. So summer and fall is going to be your best thing. Okay, primary baits for them, and then we'll talk about how to approach it a little bit. This is going to be primarily a finesse deal, but not necessarily. Here's how I usually approach a bridge pier. Let's say, for example, I got this nice bridge pier coming up. The first presentation I usually make to a bridge pier is usually with a jerk bait or like a walking topwater if the water's warm. If there is any aggressive fish on that pier, they will slam a jerk bait, but they'll get conditioned to a jerk bait real quick. So I'll fish each bridge pier for maybe 10 or 15 casts all the way around it with a jerk bait or a topwater, in either one. Try to pick the aggressive fish off of it. And then the next lure presentation I make there is with a small swim bait, like a little, Mega Bass 3-inch spark shad or something like that. Also, guys, I'll link all of my favorite bridge pier baits in my Tackle Warehouse link in the description of this video if you guys want to pick up some of those. That little small swim bait, like on an 1/8-ounce head, cast it out there, and just reel it as close as you can get to that bridge pier. Count it down, try to pay attention maybe on your 2D sonar where you're seeing most of the bait fish activity, and just work it down the sides of that bridge pier. That's going to be a really good way to catch them. The next thing that I throw out there is a drop shot. Now, the drop shot there's going to be two different ways I fish it. I'll throw the drop shot just like the jerk bait down all sides, and I'll just sort of shake it down the sides on a cast. And then if I get a few bites, I'll get right next to the bridge pier and I'll drop the drop shot vertical right underneath the boat, and I'll fish it vertical, just doodling it vertical. That's a really good way to catch them. And then finally, to clean everything up, is I'll throw like a 4-inch stick bait on a wacky rig. Get back off the bridge piers, throw that wacky rig up there. Usually I'll put maybe just a little bit of weight on it, like a little nail weight in, to get it fall just a little bit quicker. And that little 4-inch, like any type of like a baby bass color or a shad color, not the green pumpkin, but some type of a wacky rig shad pattern 4-inch stick bait is a really, really good way to catch them. Okay, now that's for the piers. Now, when you're wanting to capitalize on the bass that live between the piers, this is when you're talking about catching big numbers of fish if they're there. So what I like to do is I'll get, all you need is a 2D sonar. I'll just idle underneath the bridge and I'll stay in the shade. And the shade is going to be different under the bridge based upon the time of day, because sometimes the shade may be 20 foot off to the left or right of the bridge based upon the angle of the sun. So you want to stay in the shade. It's not necessarily being under the bridge, but you want to be in that shade of that bridge. And I'll idle underneath there, and I try to, keep my eye out and find out where, the depth of the shad. If there's any bass down there, you can see them very easily on 2D sonar. And then once I do find those areas, I'll back off of it with, start out with a little swim bait, and I'll throw that swim bait out there into the general area where I saw them on my locator. And, I'll catch some like that. And then after that wears down, I'll get right over them vertical again with the drop shot, and I'll fish them vertical. And this is the thing, guys, you can spend all day doing this, because these bass move in and out of these bridge piers all day long. It's one of those places where you can literally go back and forth all day long and catch them. It's going to get fish too, guys. If there's bass living on bridge piers, people find out pretty quick about it, but don't let that discourage you, because one thing that I found out about fishing bridge piers is if you're not fishing the right bait, you're not going to catch much, because those fish that live on those piers are highly educated. They're some of the smartest bass I have ever seen. And one of the reasons I know that is because when you're fishing like a drop shot or swim bait, you'll get a lot of bites that you don't hook. Those fish will come up and bite the tail of those worms and those swim baits because they're highly educated, because they're getting cast to in the same place over and over again. So keep your presentation small, downsize everything, stay with the natural colors. And that's why, a lot of guides, that's one of their favorite things to take clients to, is they go to bridge piers and they fish live bait. They'll drop a night crawler down there, or a minnow, or a crawdad or something, and they'll catch every fish that's down there because they're wanting to bite. They're just very smart. But anyway, there's very few lakes across the country where I have not caught them. I mean, in addition to, I'll tell you another thing to try, in addition to bridge piers that are almost just like a bridge pier, is if you guys fish some lakes, especially like on the TVA lakes, where you can actually get against the dam, or on those big concrete walls where they, the barges line up on them. Some places you can't get close, but some lakes you can get right against them. You can fish those concrete walls along the dam and along those barge channel things the same way as you do a bridge pier. The fish will set up and react the same way to that. So there's just a few tips, guys. It's like I said, it's worth the stop, man. It's like, you're not going to catch usually any big fish out there. I mean, the biggest fish I've ever caught on a bridge pier has been about 6 pounds, but you can catch a lot of, 1.5 to 3 pound fish out there. It's more of a numbers thing. Just, they're fun to fish, man, because a lot of times, if it's hot in the summer, you can go underneath that bridge and get out of the sun, and usually always get a few bites once in a while. So anyway, hope it helps out, guys. We'll talk later.